mining site known as Shookham Hills, a group of people who had finished their work could be seen leaving the area. Among the miners were a man named Shutman and his son, Eric, who were chatting about one of Eric's co-workers who had just been fired after suffering an accident on the job. When their conversation came to an end, Eric was suddenly attacked by a mysterious creature. Shutman struggled with all his strength to save his son. Unfortunately, the creature stabbed Shutman in the throat, leaving him paralyzed. Helpless and unable to move, he could only watch as Eric, covered in blood, was dragged away into the distance by the creature. Several years later, a young female guide named Ariane began gathering various pieces of information about the Shookham Hills mine. The mine apparently held a dark history, as it had once been the site of a horrifying incident in the past. Ariane deliberately researched these details because she had recently been hired to guide several people on an expedition to the Shookham Hills mine.
Hello, Ariane. It's Darren Advertment. Late as possible, so we're up.
The following day, 4 people planned a journey to Shookham Hills. They were Darren, a scientist, along with his crew, Shane, Terry, and Jamie. During the trip, they asked Ariana how many people she had previously. It turned out that since the 1970s, both the mine and the town of Shookham Hills had no longer appeared on any maps. Its population seemed to have vanished without a trace. Many people believed that the disappearance of the town was connected to a massive fire that occurred in the underground mining center, resulting in the formation of ruins around the town. This was what convinced Darren that the fire had been triggered by the presence of an extremely rare mineral. In the middle of the journey, Ariane decided to stop briefly at a shop to purchase some supplies. Upon entering the store, she noticed several strange objects being sold inside. Shortly afterward, she met the shopkeeper and purchased drinking water as well as coolant fluid for her vehicle. In addition, Ariane also asked about the route to Shookham Hills. However, as soon as the shop owner heard the name Shookham Hills, he suddenly fell silent for a moment. The same happened to another person who was with him, who abruptly stopped what he was doing. At first, the shopkeeper pretended not to know anything. Nevertheless, when Ariana insisted, the man instead advised her to turn back immediately and never go to that place. After Ariane left the shop, unexpectedly, the shopkeeper immediately made a phone call to someone and informed them about a problem that was about to come. When the journey continued, Shane suddenly expressed his concern. He said that they should not go to Shookham Hills. In the middle of the argument that followed, Ariana noticed a car that had begun to follow them. Feeling suspicious, Ariane increased the speed of the vehicle. Not long after that, she took a detour and eventually arrived at a certain location. However, as soon as they reached that point, the car behind them began to slow down. At that moment, Ariane realized that those people seemed to be deliberately trying to drive them away from the route. This led Ariane to conclude that the spot where the car slowed down was actually the location they were supposed to reach. After successfully hiding, Ariane then retraced that location. Shortly afterward, they discovered a narrow road equipped with a warning sign. Upon arriving there, Ariane and the others found that the area had been secured with an electrified fence to prevent outsiders from entering. However, before they could receive a convincing explanation, Ariane had already managed to enter the area by using a tree trunk that was nearly fallen. Once inside, they immediately began exploring the area while collecting various samples along the way. Before nightfall, Ariane decided to rest near a stream. At that location, they began discussing the Shookham Hills mining site. As the conversation continued, each of them shared their own theories. Darren presented his theory by suggesting that there might be a massive pit filled with toxic gas, which had ultimately caused the destruction of the area. However, Darren's theory was very different from what Sean believed. Sean then recounted a similar incident that had once occurred in Russia. He explained that the Russians had successfully created the deepest hole in the world, reaching a depth of approximately 1 kilometer. However, instead of obtaining the expected results, the miners reportedly heard terrifying sounds when a microphone was lowered into the hole. Sean believed that the United States might have made a similar decision, namely creating the same kind of hole in the Skookum Hills area. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, 3 mysterious individuals led by a young woman named Shelby arrived to repair a damaged section of the fence. At first, they assumed the damage had been caused by someone breaking in. However, upon closer inspection, they realized that the damage had actually been caused by a... While Shelby was talking with her 2 companions, one of their friends named C, who was in another part of the forest, was seen inspecting the fence area. There, he discovered that the fence had been torn down and had collapsed around a drainage hole. Because the hole was relatively small, C attempted to approach it. Shortly afterward, he began to hear strange sounds coming from inside the hole. Returning to Shelby and her 2 companions, they were suddenly approached by someone. That person turned out to be Schuttman, the man who had lost his child at the beginning of the story. Scottman was the leader of their group. Schuttman's arrival was meant to ask about the whereabouts of Ariane and her group. However, Schuttman and the others had not yet realized that Ariane's group had entered the area without permission. As far as they knew, they believed they had successfully driven the group away. The following day, Ariana and her team continued their journey. As they moved deeper through the forest, Ariana's group discovered soundproof foam, something that clearly should not have been in the middle of the woods. As they ventured farther, they once again found a massive drainage hole. However, before they had the chance to investigate it any further, the same vehicle that had followed them the previous day reappeared. This forced Ariana and the others to hide immediately. After making sure the situation was safe again, they left the hole and continued their journey. After walking for quite some time, they came across an area filled with abandoned houses. Ariane's group then hurried into a building that appeared to be a store. Once inside, the building turned out to be filled with thick fog. While observing their surroundings, Ariana noticed a door at the back. When the door was opened, they finally discovered the legendary Skookum Hills mine. From there, they continued their exploration until they found a massive hole that was tightly sealed and powered by an electrical current. After disconnecting the power cables and opening part of the cover, Terry, together with Sean, lowered a camera to examine the depth of the hole. However, while the process was underway, Terry suddenly heard a loud noise that startled and terrified him. When the others tried to listen as well, Terry's foot accidentally became entangled in the camera rope, causing him to fall into the hole. However, while the process was underway, Terry suddenly heard a loud noise that startled and terrified him. When the others tried to listen as well, Terry's foot accidentally became entangled in the camera rope, causing him to fall into the hole. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, they found nothing except mysterious sounds echoing through the darkness. Meanwhile, on the surface, a man named Dell arrived at the site. With a face full of anger, he drew his shotgun and issued a harsh warning for everyone to stay away from the hole. Darren and Sean tried to explain that one of their team members was still trapped inside. However, Dell did not seem to care. Instead, he cut one of the ropes in an attempt to seal the hole once again. Amid the confusion and panic, Sean finally struck Dell with a rock, knocking him unconscious. Inside the hole, Ariana realized that their rope had been cut. She immediately told Jamie to climb back up using the remaining rope. After successfully getting out and seeing someone lying unconscious on the ground, they all decided to leave the area immediately using the stranger's vehicle, even though they were still confused about what had just happened. During the journey, Sean appeared extremely angry and blamed Darren for his obsession with this strange expedition. He also questioned the identity of the company financing their adventure, which, in his view, made absolutely no sense. In the middle of the argument, the vehicle they were riding in suddenly crashed into a large hole, causing it to become stuck. As a result, they were forced to continue their journey toward the perimeter fence on foot. That night, Dell, who had previously been knocked unconscious, finally regained consciousness. Realizing that his vehicle had been stolen, he immediately called his associates to inform them of the situation.
You have a breach. Come in.
Not long after that, the focus returned to Ariana and her group, who were now terrified after hearing horrifying sounds from a creature lurking in the darkness. They decided to turn off their flashlights. Ariana then led the group using night vision equipment. Unfortunately, a creature launched a sudden attack and quickly captured Sean.
What the fuck was that? Sean! Go!
Ariane, Darren, and Jamie managed to escape and eventually encountered a vehicle driven by Schuttman. Scottman then took them to his group's headquarters. Upon arriving there, Ariana's group was brought into a house and interrogated by Scottman. When he heard the name Scottman, Darren appeared shocked, realizing that the man had once been one of the founders of the Shookham Hills Mining Company. Nevertheless, for Scottman, all of that belonged to the past. Now, he was responsible for the safety of everyone in that place. Scottman explained that people's perceptions of the mine varied greatly. Some saw it as a horrifying pit, while others believed it to be purgatory, a place of cleansing fire. Unfortunately, before Schuttman could explain further, Shelby received a radio message reporting that several monsters had spread throughout the area. Although still filled with curiosity, Ariane and her group had no choice but to follow Scottman's orders to leave immediately and seal the hole they had previously opened. Not long after they moved out, Shelby received another report stating that the creatures had now scattered everywhere. Upon hearing this, Shelby's companion, Elroy, sacrificed himself to divert the monster's attention, giving Ariana and her group a chance to hide inside a house. Struggling to remain calm, Shelby explained that the creatures were highly attracted to sound. In addition, they possessed strange tentacles capable of paralyzing a person with just a single touch. Unfortunately, while they were observing their surroundings, one of the creatures managed to enter the house. Ariana and the others tried to evade it as quickly as possible. They eventually managed to escape after discovering. In the midst of their escape, Shelby decided to separate from Ariane's group in order to divert the creature's attention. Meanwhile, Ariane, Darren, and Jamie ran at full speed toward the former excavation area. However, in the middle of their run, they suddenly came face to face with several creatures at once. In an attempt to hold the monsters back, Jamie tried to use a grenade. However, just as he was about to throw it, one of the creatures intercepted him, causing the grenade to fall before it could be used. Now only Ariane and Darren remained. Overcome with guilt, Darren finally confessed that the true reason he had undertaken the expedition was money. The company funding it was a private corporation that was extremely interested in whatever lay hidden inside the Shookham Hills mine. That was why, from the very beginning, Darren had appeared so enthusiastic and obsessed with finding the mine's location. Despite the dire situation, Ariane reluctantly decided to continue the journey on her own. This was because Darren's condition showed that he had lost his will and was no longer able to stand. Before leaving, however, Ariane promised Darren that she would return to rescue him. Meanwhile, on the surface, Schuttman and his team were preparing to confront a group of creatures attempting to break through the perimeter fence. Elsewhere, Ariane fought desperately to escape from the creatures now pursuing her. She managed to emerge from the tunnel and hide after hearing terrifying sounds all around her. Believing that the situation was finally safe, Ariane let her guard down. Without warning, a creature suddenly ambushed her. Moments later, Ariane regained consciousness and found herself on a boat. Even more horrifying, the boat was being steered by a creature, with Shelby's lifeless body lying inside. When Ariane was discovered to be conscious again, she was immediately attacked and rendered unconscious once more. Several hours later, Ariane regained consciousness. This time she found herself beside Darren, who had also been captured, along with Sean, who was in critical condition. As one of the creatures approached them, Sean explained that the creatures were an extremely rare species that reproduced and lived in colonies, much like ants or bees. Not long after that, Sean's body was dragged away and taken before the Queen of the Monsters. Without hesitation and without mercy, the Queen immediately devoured Sean alive. When it was Ariane's turn, Darren was fortunately still able to hand her a grenade he had found nearby. Ariane managed to grip the grenade just before she was taken to face the Queen. When she stood directly before the creature, Ariane swiftly shoved the grenade into its mouth. The resulting explosion created chaos, and the two of them seized the opportunity to escape. They eventually managed to reach the drainage hole they had previously damaged. Using a rope, Ariane and Darren began climbing out. However, a swarm of creatures quickly gave chase and began climbing up from below. To save Ariane, Darren chose to cut the rope, allowing Ariane to slowly reach the surface. Upon reaching the top, Ariana was immediately helped by the shop owner she had met at the beginning of the journey. It turned out that the man had arrived together with Schuttman and his team, all fully armed and prepared.
We're the only one left.
Let's get you out of here.
The following day, Schuttman escorted Ariane back to her vehicle. Before parting ways, Schuttman revealed that it was those very creatures who had killed his son. For that reason, from that moment on, Schuttman had continued to fight all of the monsters in order to avenge him. Schuttman then offered Ariane the chance to stay and join him in the war against the creatures. At first, Ariane hesitated as she stepped out of Schuttman's vehicle. However, after reflecting on all the horrifying events she had endured, Ariane finally changed her mind and got back into Schuttman's car.